On a quiet, early morning, Sarah Williams, a compassionate woman with an unwavering love for animals, was driving down a secluded road, the chill of dawn still lingering in the air. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of her car and the occasional chirp of distant birds beginning the day. Sarah was a kind-hearted soul, known for her work in animal rescue. She had always believed that no animal, regardless of size or breed, should ever suffer or be left to fend for itself. Her passion for helping abandoned creatures was not just a job, it was a calling. Her heart ached for the countless animals that endured cruelty and neglect. And her life's mission was to change that, one rescue at a time. As Sarah drove down the road, she spotted something unusual on the side. A cold chill ran through her as she slowed her car. On the shoulder of the road, just ahead, was a discarded item that at first glance appeared to be a large, forgotten box, but something about it felt off. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to stop. She wasn't sure what it was, but it didn't sit right. Pulling over to the side of the road, Sarah's heart started to race. She was no stranger to the sight of abandoned animals, but the thought of finding yet another helpless creature left to die alone brought a familiar pang of sorrow. As she approached the large, weathered box, she noticed that it wasn't just discarded, there was something inside. Her breath hitched as she bent down, her heart in her throat. When she opened the box, what she saw sent waves of anger and disbelief coursing through her veins. Inside were 9 tiny golden retriever puppies, their eyes barely open, their fur matted, and their tiny bodies trembling with weakness. They looked up at her with innocent eyes, their fragile forms barely able to move. Sarah felt her stomach twist with both horror and compassion. The puppies were in a pitiful state. Their ribs were visible beneath their thin, sickly fur, and their bodies were covered in sores and scratches. It was clear they had been neglected for far too long. A lump formed in Sarah's throat as she took in the sight before her. It was as though they had been left to die, forgotten by the world. Her hands shook as she reached down to gently scoop the fragile animals into her arms. One by one, trying to soothe them with soft words, though she could hardly choke back the tears that were threatening to spill. They were barely clinging to life. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Who would do something so cruel? How could someone discard these helpless creatures as if they were nothing more than trash? Her heart was filled with a burning anger, but she pushed it down. There was no time for anger right now. There was only time for action. Gently, she placed the puppies into the back seat of her car, making sure to buckle them in securely so they wouldn't be jostled during the drive. She could feel their tiny bodies still trembling, and she knew they were suffering. She had to get them to safety. As she drove to the nearest veterinary clinic, Sarah could only think of the lives she had just saved from the brink of death. But she also knew this was only the beginning. The puppies would need extensive care. They would need nourishment, treatment for their malnourished bodies, and, above all, love and care. They had suffered so much, but she was determined to give them the life they deserved. The clinic staff wasted no time in rushing to help. Sarah was overwhelmed with relief as the vet took the puppies into her care, immediately starting an IV for fluids and preparing to run tests. She could see the concern in the doctor's eyes as they worked quickly, knowing just how fragile these young lives were. Over the next few days, Sarah visited the clinic daily, checking in on the puppies and watching him slowly recover. It was a slow process, but each little victory was a triumph. They began to eat and gain strength, their fur growing softer and their spirits slowly returning. The tiniest of the puppies, a little female with the softest golden fur, seemed to take a particular liking to Sarah, following her gaze and reaching out with tiny paws for attention. Her heart melted every time. But even as the puppies grew stronger, Sarah couldn't shake the image of their fragile, broken bodies. She kept replaying the moment she found them, abandoned and alone, and it haunted her. How could someone do such a thing? How could someone be so cruel, so indifferent to the suffering of innocent animals? Sarah spent the following weeks providing a safe and loving environment for the puppies as they recovered. She was determined to see them all grow into strong, healthy dogs, ready to find their forever homes. Her friends and neighbors rallied behind her, offering donations and supplies to help care for the puppies. And as their health improved, Sarah started thinking about their future, where they would go, who would adopt them, and who would give them the love and care they deserved. It was a bittersweet moment when, after weeks of healing, Sarah began finding homes for the puppies. She carefully chose families who would love and care for them, ensuring that each pup would have a life filled with joy, safety, and love. The little golden retrievers, once so fragile and broken, now had a chance at a bright future. Each adoption brought both joy and sadness for Sarah. She had saved their lives, but she had to let them go. The last puppy to be adopted was the little female who had grown so attached to Sarah. It was with a tear in her eye that Sarah watched as the puppy left with her new family. Knowing she had done all she could, she had made a difference in their lives, and they would now experience the love they had always deserved. Sarah knew the journey she had undertaken with these puppies was just one small part of a much larger mission. There were still countless animals out there who needed saving. But as she drove home that day, her heart was filled with a quiet sense of peace. The road had been long, but for these 9 golden retrievers, it had led to safety, love, and a new beginning. Sarah couldn't stop fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She would continue to be their voice, their protector, and their advocate, because, for Sarah, every life mattered, and she would never stop working to ensure that no animal would ever have to suffer in silence again. With the puppies nestled gently in the backseat of her car, Sarah's heart raced as she drove towards the nearest veterinary clinic. The morning sky had turned a pale blue, but the brightness of the sun seemed to do little to lift the heaviness in her chest. The thought of what those precious little creatures had endured weighed heavily on her mind. She glanced at them through the rearview mirror, her fingers gripping the wheel tightly, her gaze shifting between the road and the fragile puppies. They were so small, so weak, yet so full of hope that they would be saved. Sarah had always been an advocate for animal welfare, but seeing these puppies, just a few days old, abandoned and left to die had shaken her to the core. She didn't understand how anyone could ever be so cruel. The scars of neglect and abuse that marred their tiny bodies seemed like a haunting reminder of how little some people cared for the lives of these innocent creatures. As she approached the veterinary clinic, a sense of urgency took over. She couldn't waste any more time. Every second mattered. The clinic's sign loomed ahead, its familiar logo a comforting sight in the midst of the turmoil Sarah was feeling. She pulled into the parking lot and hurriedly got out of the car. Sarah cradled each puppy carefully in her arms, feeling their tiny bodies tremble as she made her way to the door. As soon as she entered, the staff greeted her with concern, recognizing the distress in her eyes. Without a word, they guided her to an examination room where Dr. John Matthews, a seasoned veterinarian known for his compassion and expertise, was already waiting. Dr. Matthews was a man with a calm demeanor and a steady hand, qualities that had made him an excellent vet for over 20 years. He had seen his fair share of neglected animals, but even he seemed taken aback when Sarah laid the puppies on the examination table. The little creatures were so fragile that they looked as though a single wrong move could break them. Their fur was patchy, and they were covered in sores and dirt. Their ribs were clearly visible beneath their thin coats. The room fell silent as Dr. Matthews examined each puppy with careful attention, his fingers gently tracing the outlines of their small bodies. His brow furrowed as he noted the condition they were in. "These puppies are malnourished," he murmured, his voice filled with disbelief. "They've been without proper food or care for far too long." Sarah could barely breathe as she watched him work. Her heart ached with each movement of the doctor's hands, as if each touch was a reminder of the suffering these puppies had endured. Dr. Matthews carefully checked their gums and took their temperatures, his face growing more and more serious as he continued his examination. "There's something else," he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "They've been exposed to some kind of chemical. I'm not sure what it is, but there are clear signs of chemical burns on their skin." Sarah felt as though the world had stopped. Chemical burns. The thought of someone intentionally harming these defenseless puppies with something so cruel was unfathomable. She had always believed that people who were capable of such abuse were rare. But seeing it with her own eyes was a harsh reminder of how dark the world could be. "Who would do something like this?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. The question had no answer, no logical explanation. How could anyone, in good conscience, abandon these innocent creatures, causing them so much pain? Sarah's hands trembled as she wiped away a tear, a mixture of rage and sorrow rising in her chest. Dr. Matthews met her gaze with a look of understanding and compassion, his face softening. "I don't know, Sarah," he said gently, "but we're going to do everything we can to help them. They're going to be okay." Despite his reassuring words, Sarah knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. These puppies had been deprived of everything they needed to survive: food, warmth, and love. Their small bodies were fragile, and their immune systems were weak. Sarah understood that they would need round-the-clock care and a lot of patience to recover. But as she looked at their trembling little bodies, she knew that she couldn't let them down. Dr. Matthews continued his examination, his professional demeanor masking the deep concern he felt. He noted the dehydration in their tiny bodies and the infections beginning to form under their neglected fur. It was clear they had been without proper care for days, maybe even longer. He administered fluids through an IV to help rehydrate them, and he gave them antibiotics to combat the infections. Sarah stood by, her heart heavy, but she knew this was the best place for the puppies to be. The next few hours were a blur for Sarah. She paced the waiting room, her thoughts racing, consumed by worry and anger. How could someone just throw these puppies away like garbage? The injustice of it all weighed heavily on her heart. But even in her sorrow, she found a glimmer of hope. They had been found. They were no longer alone, no longer abandoned, and they had someone fighting for them now. At one point, Dr. Matthews stepped out of the examination room to speak with her. His face was a little softer now, though still marked by concern. "They're stable for now," he said. "We'll need to monitor them closely, but I'm hopeful that with the right care, they'll recover. They're strong, Sarah. They have the will to live." Sarah nodded, grateful for his words, though the pain of seeing those tiny, broken bodies still lingered. She could only imagine what they had gone through before being left to die in that cold box on the side of the road. But she knew, deep in her heart, that they were not alone anymore. The puppies spent the next few weeks at the clinic, slowly gaining strength and recovering from the malnutrition and injuries they had endured. Sarah visited them every day, watching as their fur grew softer, their eyes brightened, and their spirits began to show signs of life. It was a long journey, but each day brought new progress, new hope, and though Sarah still couldn't understand the cruelty that had been inflicted upon them, she found comfort in the fact that, despite everything, these puppies were no longer alone. They had been saved, and now, with Sarah's love and the care of Dr. Matthews, they were going to have a chance at a life full of warmth, safety, and love, everything they deserved. As Sarah sat by their side, gently stroking their soft fur, she couldn't help but think about the countless animals still out there in need of help. There was so much work to be done, but she was ready, because for every act of cruelty, there was always someone willing to step forward and fight for the voiceless. And Sarah Williams was just one of many who would never stop fighting. Sarah couldn't shake the image of the 9 tiny golden retriever puppies. Each day, as she watched them recover and grow stronger, she thought more and more about the person responsible for their abandonment. It haunted her, the cruelty, the lack of remorse. She needed answers. Who could do something so heartless? Who could leave defenseless puppies to die, abandoned on the side of the road like discarded trash? She knew she couldn't simply move on without knowing the truth. There had to be a reason behind their suffering, and Sarah was determined to find it. Her investigation began quietly. At first, she returned to the site where she had found the puppies. It was a quiet stretch of road, isolated from the nearby towns, and there were no houses or businesses in sight. Sarah walked up and down the shoulder of the road, looking for anything that might offer a clue. She crouched down, scanning the ground for any evidence that could help her piece together what had happened. It was then that she saw it, half buried in the dirt. Hidden behind a pile of fallen leaves was a small, crumpled receipt. She carefully picked it up, smoothing out the creases, and read the faint letters printed on it. A gas station, just a few miles away, was listed on the receipt. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark a thought in Sarah's mind. Could this be the lead she needed? Could the person responsible for abandoning those puppies have been so careless as to leave behind a trace? She decided it was worth a shot. With the receipt in hand, she drove to the gas station. The small, local station was quiet, with only a few cars parked outside. Sarah walked in, holding the receipt close, and approached the attendant behind the counter. "I was wondering if you could help me," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found a receipt near where I found a group of abandoned puppies. And it looks like it was from here. Could you tell me who made a purchase around this time?" The attendant glanced at the receipt and then back at Sarah. "Let me check the records," he said. After a few moments, he returned with a name. Adam Foster. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The name didn't ring any bells, but it was a start. "Do you know where I can find him?" Sarah asked, trying to remain calm, though inside her heart was pounding. The attendant pointed her in the direction of a nearby farm, a place that had been abandoned for years. "He used to live there," he said. "Not sure if he still does, but I'd check if I were you." Sarah didn't hesitate. She thanked the attendant and drove out of the gas station parking lot, her mind racing. A farm? Adam Foster? The name felt familiar now, like something she had heard in passing, but she couldn't place it. Still, she had to follow the trail. She wasn't sure what she would find, but she was determined to confront whoever had left those puppies to die. The drive to the farm was long and uneventful, the winding country roads leading her further away from the town, deeper into isolation. As she turned onto a gravel road leading to the farm, she saw it, a dilapidated farmhouse in the distance, its paint peeling and the windows boarded up. The yard was overgrown, wild with weeds and the remnants of what used to be a place of life. It was clear that no one had lived here in quite some time. Sarah parked her car at the end of the driveway, taking a deep breath before stepping out. Her heart was heavy, her thoughts swirling with anticipation and dread. She approached the front door cautiously and knocked, her knuckles tapping softly against the wood. She waited. Nothing. She knocked again, this time with more urgency. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his late 30s. He was tall, unshaven, with a weathered face that seemed to tell a story of hardship. His eyes were tired, hollow, This was Adam Foster. Sarah felt a surge of anger but pushed it down, reminding herself that she needed to stay calm. She had to understand. She had to get the truth. "Are you Adam Foster?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. He nodded, looking her up and down, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. "Who's asking?" "My name is Sarah Williams," she said, taking a deep breath. "I found 9 puppies abandoned on the side of the road. I found a receipt from your gas station nearby. I need to know what happened. Why did you leave them?" Adam's eyes flickered, but he didn't immediately respond. Sarah could see the gears turning in his head as he tried to decide whether to answer her. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and detached. "They were just a burden," he muttered, almost as if the words didn't mean anything to him. "Their mother died. I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't have the time. The money. I couldn't keep them." Sarah's heart clenched. The words felt hollow, empty. She could hear the lack of remorse in his voice, the absence of guilt. It was as if the lives of those puppies hadn't mattered to him at all. "You left them to die," Sarah said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You just abandoned them, helpless, to suffer. How could you do that?" Adam shrugged, a dismissive gesture that sent a wave of fury through Sarah. "It wasn't like I had a choice. They were just dogs. No one wanted them." Sarah's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but something in her gut told her that nothing would change. He didn't feel bad. He didn't care. For him, they were just a nuisance, an inconvenience. "That's not how life works," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "You don't just throw away a living creature because it's inconvenient. You don't abandon something that's depending on you. Those puppies deserved better than you." Adam looked at her, his expression hardening. "I didn't ask for this," he replied. "They were too much trouble." Sarah felt her stomach turn. This was the man responsible for leaving those innocent puppies to die. This was the man who had abandoned them. Without a second thought, she couldn't stay here any longer. She turned away, her mind swirling with anger and disgust. But before she left, she looked back at him one last time. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice steady but laced with a cold certainty. "Because people like you, people who don't care about the lives of those who can't speak for themselves, always get what they deserve." Without another word, Sarah walked back to her car. Her hands trembled, but she couldn't let it show. She had to be strong. For the puppies, for everything they had gone through. As she drove away, leaving the farm behind her, she felt a sense of resolve settle deep within her. She would never let this man, this heartless person, get away with his cruelty. The puppies had been saved, and now it was her mission to make sure no one else ever had to endure what they had gone through. Sarah would make sure of it. Sarah stood on the gravel driveway, the air heavy with the tension that had built up between her and Adam Foster. She felt a mixture of disbelief and fury pulsing through her veins. But she refused to let her emotions take over. The confrontation had been difficult, but she couldn't back down now. She had come this far to find the truth, to face the person responsible for the suffering of those 9 innocent puppies. And she wouldn't let him off the hook so easily. She locked eyes with Adam, whose expression remained cold and unrepentant. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, as if this entire situation was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show weakness. He needed to hear the truth, needed to understand that what he had done was unforgivable. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "How could you just leave them like that? Those puppies were defenseless, helpless, and you just walked away, like they didn't matter." Adam's face remained unchanged, a hollow expression in his eyes as he shrugged. "I didn't have a choice," he said flatly. "Their mother died, and I wasn't about to take care of them. They were just animals. After all, who would want them? His words stung like a slap in the face. The cruelty in his tone, the indifference to the suffering he had caused, was almost too much to bear. Sarah fought to keep herself composed. Her hands clenched at her sides as she took a deep breath. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let him think that what he did was acceptable. No, Adam, she said, her voice steady now, with an edge of certainty. You made a choice. You made the decision to abandon those puppies. You chose to leave them to fend for themselves. To suffer, no matter how you try to justify it. You're the one responsible. But that doesn't mean you have to keep living this way. You don't have to be someone who walks away from the innocent and the vulnerable. Adam's lips twisted into a bitter smile, a look that spoke volumes about his lack of remorse. And what do you want me to do? What difference does it make? They're fine now, right? You saved them. You've done your part. Sarah's throat tightened as she fought back tears. But she wasn't about to let this man off so easily. It makes a difference, Adam. It makes all the difference in the world. Just because you think those puppies are fine now doesn't mean you've somehow fixed everything. They've been through hell, and you did that. You took their chance at a decent life away from them. He sneered at her words, his voice tinged with irritation. I didn't want them. What do you expect me to do about it now? It's done. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She knew she wasn't going to get an apology. Not from someone so callous. But she wasn't doing this for him. She wasn't here to make him feel guilty, though she wished with all her heart that he could. She was here for the puppies, for their future. I don't need an apology from you, Sarah said, her voice unwavering. What I need is for you to understand that it's never too late to change. You still have a chance to do the right thing. You can still be better than what you've shown me. You can be the person who steps up, who takes responsibility, who makes amends. But that's up to you. I can't make you care about what you've done. But I can show you what it means to fight for something worth fighting for. Adam remained silent for a moment, his gaze avoiding hers as he stood there, lost in his own thoughts. For a brief moment, Sarah thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, a moment of doubt. Perhaps, or a shred of remorse, but just as quickly, it was gone. He was still the same man who had abandoned those puppies without a second thought. I don't need your lessons, Adam muttered, his voice rough. I'm not some charity case. Okay. Sarah took a step closer, her heart filled with a quiet determination. This isn't about charity. This is about doing what's right. This is about protecting those who can't protect themselves. And Adam, whether you realize it or not, that's something worth fighting for. The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Sarah knew that she couldn't change Adam in this moment. She couldn't force him to feel the remorse he so clearly lacked. But what she could do was stand firm in her resolve. She could fight for the puppies, for their future, for their safety, because she knew that this wasn't just about rescuing a group of abandoned dogs. It was about ensuring that no creature, no living, breathing being, would ever be treated with the kind of cruelty that Adam had shown those puppies. It was about sending a message that we are all responsible for those who cannot speak for themselves. That it is up to us to protect and care for the vulnerable. And Sarah was determined to keep that fight alive, no matter what it took. Even as she walked away from Adam, leaving him behind in the shadows of his own indifference, Sarah knew that she couldn't just walk away from the puppies. They had come so far, and she had made a promise to them, to herself, that she would see this through to the end. She would give them the life they deserved, full of love, care, and compassion. They would grow strong, happy, and safe, and she would continue to fight for them, just as she would fight for every animal who had ever been abandoned or neglected. As Sarah got into her car and drove away, her heart remained heavy, but it was also filled with a quiet hope. Adam might not have understood the gravity of what he had done. But Sarah did, and that was all that mattered. The puppies were her responsibility now, and she would not stop until they had the life they deserved. Because sometimes, fighting for what's right means standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Even when the odds are stacked against you. And Sarah knew that, no matter how hard the journey ahead might be, she would never stop fighting for those who needed her most. As the weeks passed, Sarah's days were filled with the rhythmic hum of caring for the puppies. Each morning, she would wake early, her heart full of a quiet, steadfast hope, knowing that with each passing day, these tiny lives were becoming stronger, healthier, and more vibrant. The days of their weakness and suffering were behind them now. Their coats had thickened, their eyes sparkled with the curiosity of puppies discovering the world around them. And their little paws began to scamper eagerly, full of life and energy. It was a sight that brought tears to Sarah's eyes every day. The kind of tears that didn't come from sadness but from sheer gratitude, for the puppies. For the chance to give them a better life. For the fight she had been able to win. The road to recovery had been a long one, filled with sleepless nights and endless vet visits. But now, each of the puppies was thriving. They played together in the backyard, tumbling and chasing one another, their little tails wagging furiously. Sarah would often sit on the porch, watching them, her heart swelling with pride. These were no longer the fragile, sickly creatures she had found abandoned in that cold box by the side of the road. They were full of promise, full of life, and Sarah had given them that. But as much as she felt the warmth of her success in saving them, she couldn't shake the haunting memory of Adam. The man who had caused them so much suffering still lingered in her thoughts. Sarah knew that her fight wasn't over. Saving the puppies was just the first step. Now, she needed to ensure that Adam faced the consequences of his actions. What he had done could not go unpunished. It wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message to anyone who might think they could harm another living creature without facing accountability. Sarah continued to press for justice. She made countless phone calls, gathered evidence, and spoke with animal rights organizations. She made sure that Adam's name was known, that his actions were not forgotten. The fight for justice was slow, but she never gave up. Every phone call, every meeting, every petition she signed, it was all a step toward holding him accountable for what he had done. In the meantime, she didn't let the puppies out of her sight. They were her focus, her motivation. Sarah knew they needed to find their forever homes soon. Homes where they could live out the rest of their lives surrounded by love, care, and attention. She'd already received several inquiries from families eager to adopt. But Sarah was careful. She wanted to make sure that each of the puppies found the right home. The kind of home that would give them the love they deserved. The kind of home where they would be safe, cherished, and protected. She knew that their futures were bright. There would be challenges. Of course. Raising these puppies had been no easy task. But seeing him run, play, and grow into healthy, joyful dogs gave Sarah a sense of fulfillment she couldn't describe. These puppies, once abandoned and discarded, were now filled with the promise of a full, happy life, and that was thanks to her persistence, her love, and her unwavering commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah's determination to continue her fight for animal rights grew stronger with every passing day. She used the story of the puppies to raise awareness about animal cruelty and abandonment. Speaking at local schools and community centers, sharing her experience with anyone who would listen. Her voice became a beacon of hope for others who were fighting similar battles. And she soon found herself becoming a leader in the movement for animal justice. Her work, once focused on saving these puppies, had grown into something larger, a mission to change the way society viewed animals and their rights. As Sarah worked tirelessly, she found strength not just in her love for the puppies, but in the support of her community. More people began to rally behind her cause, joining her in the fight for the lives of animals. It was a powerful reminder that, even in the face of cruelty, there was always hope, there was always a chance for change. She had seen it in the puppies, how they had fought for their lives, how they had healed and grown, and now, she saw it in herself, in her resolve to continue this fight. Adam, meanwhile, had become more of a shadow in Sarah's life. His indifference still burned inside her, but she refused to let it consume her. She knew that confronting him had been important, but now, the focus had to be on the future, on the healing that had taken place, on the puppies and the many other animals who would benefit from her continued efforts. Adam's actions might have been horrific, but they didn't define Sarah. They didn't define the puppies. They didn't define the people who had rallied behind her. Sarah kept moving forward, step by step, never looking back. She had learned that justice wasn't always immediate, and sometimes the fight for what was right could feel slow, drawn out, and uncertain. But with each small victory, with each life saved, she knew she was making a difference. She could see the change in the puppies every day, and that was all the motivation she needed to keep going. And as the weeks turned into months, something beautiful began to unfold. The puppies found their forever homes, each one adopted by loving families who promised to give them everything they needed to thrive. They were no longer the weak, sickly creatures Sarah had found that morning. They were full of life and laughter, their new families bringing joy into their world. Sarah had kept her promise to them. Despite Adam's lack of remorse, Sarah knew that his time would come. The wheels of justice may have been slow, but they were still turning. In time, he would have to answer for what he had done. But Sarah didn't need to see that happen to know that the world was changing. She had already seen the power of one person's actions to make a difference, to save lives, to change hearts. In the end, Sarah realized that while she could never undo the harm that had been done to those puppies, she had given them the chance they deserved, a chance for love, for safety, for a bright future, and that was more than enough. It was a reminder that, even in a world filled with cruelty, there was always room for hope, and Sarah would continue to fight for that hope, for the animals who couldn't speak for themselves, for as long as she had breath in her lungs. The story of the puppies didn't end with Adam's actions. It ended with the love they received, the lives they lived, and the hope they carried with them into their new homes. It ended with the knowledge that, no matter how dark the world could seem, there was always a glimmer of light, a chance to make things right. And Sarah knew, deep in her heart, that as long as she fought, that light would continue to shine.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.